We are going to go ahead and get started. Is the top of the hour, actually 1 minute past the top of the hour. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Cover All Your Bases with Wide Records Management. We appreciate you joining today. And the first thing I want to do is just take a second to introduce our speakers today. My name is Shana Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmal. And I am joined by our key speaker today, Director of Sales Engineering, Dean Misenhimer. Now, before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen. And we're going to answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions similar to the person who asked if we started yet, you can also put those into the question and answer section on your screen. We have not enabled the raise your hand option just because there are so many people on the webinar, so we don't want people talking over each other. There will be at least one poll question, so if you please keep an eye out for that. It is an anonymous question, so please answer. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. Okay, so to kick things off, I have a couple of slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Gimmal is a records, information management, and governance software company that was founded in 2002. Our goal is to help you achieve information governance by providing solutions that balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that delivers solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include migration, file analysis, electronic and physical records management, document management for SAP. And for those who are not new to our webinars, you may see a slight name change. They are the same products, but with a more simplified name. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dean so he can get started with today's presentation.
Thanks, Shana. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And let's go ahead and jump in. So as we talk about kind of wide records management, the first question to ask simply is, where are your records today, right? It's not unusual as we talk to clients and prospects that they have records in multiple content sources, not just in content management systems, but in lots of different places. So as you stop and look through your organization, how many different places do you have records out there? Right, either through acquisitions, where companies will acquire other companies and their IT infrastructure gets brought in, or through the need for specialized applications around maybe it's document imaging or it's good manufacturing practices or whatever it may be, or some companies just take a decentralized approach. They'll let departments choose whatever application they think they need to address their business need. And so often you find yourself with records stored in multiple places in multiple systems. That can include ECM systems, right? Legacy SharePoint environments that were rolled out, back in 2010, 2012, 2016, that were just kind of put out there and expanded and grew and weren't put out with a lot of pre-planning done. Or there's legacy content management repositories like IBM FileNet or OpenText Documentum or Content Server that, quite frankly, could have been there for 20 years or more. And then there are cloud services, right? A lot of companies have moved or are making the move to Microsoft 365 and moving payloads into the cloud, or they're using other cloud-based services like Box. And then there's file systems, right? A lot of content stored out across network file shares and records stored out on network file shares. And then there's physical records, rooms of paper with boxes, folders, external warehouses, offsite warehouses. There's a lot of information in a lot of different places. And so oftentimes, the first instinct is we'll just migrate it all, right? We're going to Microsoft 365. We'll just migrate everything to the cloud. Life will be grand. But there are some challenges with that approach, right? How much data do you have? Have you ever stopped and really done a data analysis to look at how much content is there across your different content sources? 2 terabytes, 10 terabytes, 100 terabytes? We've even talked to clients that have had over a petabyte of information that, across their various content sources. Second, who's out there? Who's using these different systems? Are any of these systems integrated into critical business functions like good manufacturing practices, or into financial reporting systems, or into, other, SAP archiving? What are these different systems used for? Can you just pick the content up and migrate them, or is that part of a bigger project that needs to be thought about? Are there custom integrations between homegrown systems and these other systems that need to be taken into account? And then how long would it take to do, right? Gimmal has done large-scale migrations for a lot of clients, and what we would call a fairly common migration, from 2 to 4 terabytes of content. By the time you do the analysis and you actually begin the test migrations and you validate and you do the migration of the data, that's a 2 to 3 month project just for one content source. So, time is money, and large scale migrations take time and they cost money. And if you haven't budgeted for that, that could cannibalize your project, your project budget, or push your budget back, or push your project back. And there are just things you need to think about before you think, oh, we'll just migrate everything, right? Know the differences between the platforms. If you're going to migrate from a legacy content management system into Microsoft 365, do you know the differences in the data structures? Do you know the limitations of one platform versus another? Are there, certain characters that won't migrate over, or long path names that may not move, or reserved keywords? What about metadata mapping, right? Have you looked at how the metadata might map? Do you have the same content or object types on both sides to move the data over to, or do you have to do work there first? What about security? What is the security model like in the system you want to migrate from? And how do you want to do that in the system you're migrating to? It may not be a one-to-one mapping. You may take the opportunity to simplify your security or to deploy it differently in the new system. And then there's validation. You can't just pick stuff up and move it. You've got to do it in batches. Somebody has to validate that the data moved over correctly, which means you need subject matter experts that understand not just the content, but also the metadata for that content. And then there's change management that goes with that, right? So, just thinking, oh, we'll just migrate everything in one place. Great idea, certainly a good goal to have, but it's not an instantaneous thing where it's a copy and paste type operation, right? There's a lot of things you have to put into consideration there. And, it's an area, as I mentioned, Gimmal has done a lot of complex migrations, and our Gimmal Migrate product is designed to make that much easier and make that a much more streamlined process. Gimmal Migrate can move clients from OpenText Content Server, LiveLink, or Documentum directly into Microsoft 365 and bring over content and metadata and do security mapping and do metadata mapping and manage that process for you. And one of the nice things about doing a migration, if it makes sense, is the ROI there, right? If I can take a legacy system off maintenance and no longer pay $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year or every other year in maintenance costs, that may pay for my migration project as well as my records project, quite frankly. So there are definitely benefits to doing migration, but it has to be thought about in the big picture of your overall records program. And the same is true with physical records. Again, I've got boxes, I've got folders, I've got, shelves, I've got warehouses. And the initial thought process is, let's just scan everything. And again, it's a great goal to have, and you certainly may need to scan some, as much as you can. But again, scanning and digital conversion takes time and takes money. And there are things that you need to think about as you begin to look at doing kind of what some folks refer to as a backfile conversion. The first simply is, what's the quality of your records? Is everything neatly organized? Is everything on shelves and marked? And, you have all your finance boxes in one place and all of your operations boxes in another one? Or is everything just kind of stuck on a shelf, right? Is your records room kind of the junk drawer of the company where things just get stuck on boxes and people forget about it? You have to think about that. How much time are you going to have to spend, again, doing some data analysis up front? Then as you get ready to do the digital conversion, what condition are the records in? Are they stapled together? Do they have paper clips? Is everything together the way it needs to be? Do you have records that need special handling, right? We've talked with municipalities, with other companies that have long histories. They can have records that are over 100 years old, right? And that are in sensitive condition. They can't just be run through the sheet feeder of a scanner, right? They require special handling, or they're mixed size, mixed format, right? As you start to think about the technical requirements of scanning information. What DPI, what resolution do I need to scan things so that they're easy to read, and that I can run them through optical character recognition and get good results so I can search on those documents? What format do I want to store everything in? PDF, PDF-A if I need to really have a secure archive? And is everything the same size? Are you a multinational? If you are, you've probably run into the situation of you've got, in the US, we have 8.5 by 11 documents. We have legal documents. Then you get into A4 documents. If you're an engineering shop, you may have engineering drawings that can be, 11 by 17, 24 by 36 inches. You may have things in all different sizes that need to be dealt with. And you may have different media types, right? Not just delicate records, but what do you have? Microfilm, microfiche, if you want to go back a few years. Do you have bound items, books that need to be captured and scanned? How do you deal with all that? And then can you do all this in-house? Do you have the expertise? Do you have the hardware to do it? Right? Do you have high-speed scanners that can do hundreds of pages a minute? Or do you just have a bunch of multifunction devices that will not do thousands of images a day, day after day after day? So you have to begin to take that into consideration as you think about backfile conversion. And then your network file shares. Everybody has file shares, right? And quite frankly, including Gimmal. Everybody has their U drive or their S drive, or places where records are stored. And so oftentimes, again, information just gets put out there, and over time you start to get this terabytes of information that's poorly organized and full of information that a lot of it may be out of date. So, before you just try and migrate that information or put records controls on that information in place, you might want to do some analytics. Discover what you have out there, right? Figure out how old some of the information is, figure out what's in some of the information, and begin to organize and label the files on your file system. Because once I know what's out there, I can delete the rot, the redundant, obsolete, and trivial content, and cut down on the volume of my content. And then secondly, I can migrate content that's high value, back to that migrate word. Content that's high value, that provides value to the company, value to the business, I can migrate that to the cloud. I can get it into a more secure environment. I can do version control on it now. We can more effectively collaborate on it. But there may be a lot of content that is what I would call low value content. Doesn't mean it's not important, doesn't mean that we don't need it, but it's more being kept for archive or record purposes. I can leave that on the file system and put record policy on it on the file system if I've been able to organize and label that information and I know what it is, right? I talked with a client this week. Their internal approach with their file systems was, we have team-based areas in our file systems where we've set folders up, but then we give each user their own folder area on the file share, and they can organize things and name things however they want underneath their folders. And needless to say, they had reached a point where they didn't necessarily know what was on their file shares as a result, right? Dean Q4 isn't the most descriptive name for a file, right? So, file analytics can help you determine what's there and make good decisions then on the information on how to govern it. And that's where Gimmal Discover comes in, right? It can help you do the analytics. It can also, as it analyzes content on the file systems, apply labels, which can then be used downstream in my records management approach, right? And we'll show you an example of that here a little later on. And so that brings us to records, which is really what we're here to talk about. What about the records? So we've migrated the things that made sense. We've done analytics. We've we've digitized things where we can. We've gotten our house in order, but we still need now to put records policy on the content. And we've kind of realized we can't get everything into one single simple repository. So how do I simplify my policy management? How do I manage my electronic records and any physical records that I still may have in a consistent fashion and apply record classification and record retention in a more automated fashion, right? I can't expect users to keep a list of how things are classified and delete things when they're supposed to, right? I need to automate that process and make it a non-disruptive process. And I might need to manage legal holds across these different content sources, right? If I'm served with a discovery request or I need to put a legal hold on a bunch of content, there's no guarantee it's all going to be in one spot. It might be on the file system and it might be in SharePoint Online, and it could be in different places. And so I need to be able to manage that legal hold effectively and manage the disposition of records across these different sources in an effective fashion from kind of a central policy management system. And then I just want to be able to have visibility into all of my records. As a records manager, I don't want to have to be bouncing between different systems to get a view of what the records are in that system. It'd be nice to have one dashboard, one place to go, one set of reports to be able to run and see where my records are, see what's out there, and see how to manage things. And then, the end goal, to minimize change management, do this without disrupting my end user population. Don't make it harder for them to do their job. Make it easier, quite frankly, and show value to them, and they'll embrace it. And that's where Gimmal Records comes in, right? Gimmal Records is designed to integrate with various content repositories and provide that central dashboard where I can manage my file plan and my retention schedule. I can push records policies out to the records where they're at rest in the respective repositories, and I can then manage those records throughout their life cycle, and disposition records at the end of that life cycle, and do that in a controlled fashion, where I have audit trails, I have destruction certificates, I have reports, I have everything I need to kind of back up my program and back up what I'm doing. So with that, let's take a minute. We'll pop into Gimmal Records Management and just give you a look at, we won't do a full-on demo today because that's a 35, 45-minute operation. But we'll give you kind of a taste, and if you want to see more, we'll hit you with a poll question later where you can request a demo. So this is Gimmal Records, right? It's designed to provide that central web-based dashboard so that I, as a records manager, can quickly, when I log in through the browser, see, oh, I'm managing records in SharePoint Online. I'm managing records on my network file share. I've got some physical records. I have records in an old SharePoint on-premise environment, and I'm managing some records in Box. So I have records in 5 different sources being managed from a common instance of Gimmal Records. Well, the way Gimmal Records works is we're monitoring these different repositories. So as you're digitizing content and adding it to SharePoint Online, as you're moving content off of your file share into SharePoint Online, or as you may be moving information around between different locations, Gimmal's simply monitoring those repositories and looking for new information showing up. And when we find new information, we're going to crawl it, and we're going to run through an automated record classification process. So we'll look at the records, we'll capture properties about those records, and then we'll go, okay, based on what I know about this record, based on where it's at, I'm going to run through the classification rules, and I think that this record is a contract, a general contract. And I think this other record is a marketing campaign record. And I think that this record happens to be a benefit record. And so it begins to assign record policies to the records as it discovers them in these respective repositories, or over time, as records begin, records that are still active business documents may be versioned, may be updated. And as those updates or changes are made, we'll catch those, we'll look, we'll rerun through the classification to see if that changes anything. If I move a document and mark it from draft to final or from final to archive, that may change how the retention happens on that record. And so what Gimmal's doing is we're simply looking at your repositories, coming down, and as we discover records, we're taking that record and going, oh, well, this record was in SharePoint Online. I captured it earlier today during a demo. Here's the record class that I assigned this record to, and here's a link to where that record is in this case, SharePoint Online. Well, if I want to see more details, I just click the 3 dots. And that tells me, okay, this record has been what we call declared, meaning it's been locked down in the respective repository by Gimmal. So Gimmal triggered SharePoint's record locking in the background so that this record is no longer editable. It's reached a state in its life cycle where it should no longer be changed. I can see the record classification that Gimmal's assigned it to. In this case, LEG06, my dispute resolution and litigation. And because that happens to be a record classification that is case-based, it assigned it to the appropriate record case file based on one of the properties we captured, the matter number. We assigned a unique record ID. We know exactly where that record is living in SharePoint Online. And then based on the record class, the record inherited the appropriate life cycle. So from the date that this particular matter was marked as closed, the first thing we did is as soon as the case was marked as closed, we declared all the records, meaning we locked them in the respective repositories. Then we dropped into the second phase of the life cycle, which is from the date of the matter, all right, the matter date field, keep the records for 6 years, and at the end of that 6-year period, do a dispose and delete. And that's kind of where we're at. And this particular case was backdated, so you can see the expiration was set for back in 2006. So these will be ready for somebody to approve the disposition. And what begins to happen over time now, as Gimmal's constantly crawling and looking and classifying, is as a records manager, I have one place to go to see all of my records. I can see all my SharePoint Online records, my SharePoint on-premise records. I can see all my records that are sitting out on my network file shares. I can see records that have been declared and locked down, right, regardless of the repository. I can see records that might be marked as obsolete, or I can see records that are assigned to a legal hold. And for any of these records, I always have the ability to come in here and simply say, well, let me click the 3 dots and see the details on that record. Or let me click on the pull down and take a look at all the properties we captured about that record. Oh, this record has a Microsoft 365 retention label. We're able to capture that. Or this record has metadata values associated with the content type. It's an enterprise document. Or, you know what, maybe I want to view my records according to my file plan and my retention schedule. So now I can come in and say, well, you know what, I know I've got a bunch of purchasing records out here, and I want to go look at my purchasing records, and I've got a bunch of invoices. Let me see all of my invoices that have been assigned to this particular record class. And now again, I can see SharePoint records, I can see file system records, and because on a file system, the name or even the folder may not always be descriptive. If we use Gimmal Discover and we run through and we do that labeling that I talked about, we can actually capture the label that Gimmal Discover can place on a file share record. So it analyzed this document, it looked at it and said, okay, I found a bunch of terms in this document that make me think it's an invoice purchase order. I'm going to label it that way. And now Gimmal Records said, okay, well, I'm going to assign it to this record class then based on that analysis that Gimmal discovered it, right? So it starts to bring it all together. And at the end of the process, as a records manager, you want an easy way to manage the disposition process. You have an integrated disposition area where I can see all records that have reached a state in their life cycle where they're ready for disposition approval. I can see if my records have approval workflows set up. So I can see that for this particular record class, Rebecca was the first level approver. She approved it last week. It's waiting on me now to give it my approval, and then the record will be triggered for disposition directly from the repository that the record is located in. And so I've got visibility. If I am using those case-based records that we talked about earlier, I can actually come in and I can say, well, let me see all the records that are associated to the case. And if I want to dispose of the entire case, I can do that with a single mouse click now. So whether there's 5 records, 50 or 500 records in that case across one or more repositories, I have the ability to approve the disposition them all. And at the end of the day, we might need to prove what we did, why we did it, when we did it. We have the destruction certificates, and we have the record archive of disposed records that we can work with, right? That we can provide. So, it's all about wrapping your arms around what do I have out there, migrating information that makes sense that you can, digitizing information that makes sense that you can, but understanding that that still may not get everything into one nice, neat little bucket. You may need to deal with information across multiple sources, and you may need to do some analytics to figure out what some of that information is, right? Bob left the company 10 years ago, but there's 100 subfolders underneath a folder called Bob, and nobody knows what's in them. How do we deal with that? Do you want to be the one that has to go through each folder and look at every document, right? Analytics can help, and that can tie into how the records policy is placed on things. So with that, I'm going to jump back to the slides here. If you do have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat panel as we run through the poll here. Shana, I will turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. So Dean went through a little bit of a demonstration. If you would like to see a personalized demonstration of any of the products that Dean went through, not just Gimmal Records, which you saw at the end, please just go ahead and fill out the poll now. You should see it pop up on your screen. But with that, I'll also jump into a couple of Q&A questions that we have. We have 1 minute left, so I'll try to make this quick. So the first one is, what repositories can you migrate to and from?
So Gimmal Migrate can migrate content directly from OpenText Content Server, LiveLink, or OpenText Documentum into Microsoft 365. It can also bring, if you have content sitting in a folder structure on file systems, it can bring content in from file systems as well.
Great. And then the second one, what repositories can Gimmal Records manage records in?
Yeah, so Gimmal Records, there are connectors for SharePoint, SharePoint Online, Box, network file shares, Documentum, and FileNet. Additional connectors can be created kind of based on client need and market demand. So, we just use the APIs that Gimmal Records has, along with the APIs of the target system to manage the records in.
Okay, and the next one I have is, can you organize per organizational unit? May one set up retention per organizational unit?
You can. Part of that gets it just into how your records are organized, but there are ways, in Gimmal you could create, record classifications that said, okay, I only want this record class to apply to records that are in certain locations or where a certain metadata property is in effect. And even at a record manager level, right? If I'm the global records manager, but Shayna is a department record manager and you're a department record manager, and I want you to be able to see different records and not see the other person's records, we can set up filters that can provide that level of capability as well. So you can kind of slice it and dice it different ways.
Great. There are a couple more that popped in, so I'll just read these off real quick. Can Gimmal clean up old, not out-of-the-box SharePoint records before migrating to new SharePoint and create new retention rules on the migrated data?
You could. So, Gimmal can connect to SharePoint on premise. So if you had, legacy environments, you could absolutely put retention on that legacy content, just kind of based on what you may know about it, whether it's library names, content types, or site collection names, and let that content live out a very short retention and migrate what's left. Or, process-wise, there are different ways you could approach that, but you could absolutely manage it there without. And then as stuff is migrated into SharePoint Online, Gimmal would basically just reclassify it after it's migrated because metadata may be different or something may change how it should be classified or retained.
Great. And then this is the last one, unless another one sneaks in. Beyond the dashboard, can one link back to the source data so we can see the original document?
You can. So throughout the Gimmal interface, that URL to where the document is located is always maintained. So from the dashboard, from that manage screen where I showed the list of records, from the disposition inbox, you can always get to that link to click it and go view the record if you have view permissions in the repository.
And then another one did sneak in. Are physical records presented, and do you have a detailed barcoding capabilities for box folders and documents?
Short answer is yes. Physical records are managed as well, and we can provide kind of the basics around physical records, or we can take it all the way into doing things like warehouse management, RFID, and others if you need that. And there's one question in the chat panel I see. What are the Gimmal modules? We'll close it out with this. Shayna showed a slide at the beginning, but basically it is Gimmal Records, Gimmal Physical, Gimmal Link for integrating with SAP, Gimmal Discover for doing file analytics, and Gimmal Migrate for migrating content, from the repositories I mentioned to Microsoft 365. Did I leave any out?
I don't think so. I think you got them all.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, we are a couple of minutes over. For those who have any more questions, our contact information is right there on the screen. You can email either Dean or myself. Dean, if you want to go ahead and forward on to the next screen.
Working on it. There we go.
There it is. You can also visit our website with some more information on the things that Dean presented in today's presentation. If you're interested in a recording of this webinar, we will be sending it out between 24 and 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. So please check your email if you're looking for the recording. And we also hope to see you for our next webinar titled "What is in the Box? Legal Discovery for Physical Records." Thank you everybody for joining, and have a great rest of your day.